I did not anticipate that events would unfold in this manner. I believed a mother's love was meant to be unconditional. It was intended to forge enduring connections. Yet I now find myself amidst an emotional battleground, clutching only fragmented aspirations. James has consistently been my utmost priority. I single-handedly reared him when his father abandoned us. I made numerous sacrifices to ensure he had an improved life. Countless hours laboring as a domestic, persevering through every adversity to guarantee he could attend school, acquire desirable possessions, and experience a life far superior to my own. I accomplished everything with a smile, despite experiencing back pain and declining health. However, I deemed it worthwhile. I always reminded myself that eventually, my sacrifices would yield rewards. At the age of 18, James encountered a life-threatening condition. His kidney was deteriorating, and the physician indicated that a transplant was necessary for survival. I acted without hesitation. I donated mine, believing that my affection for him would reinforce our connection. For a period, it occurred. He endured, and I recognized that I had relinquished not merely my kidney, but my own essence. However, as the years elapsed, a transformation occurred. Gradually, akin to the gradual erosion of a hitherto steadfast cliff, James became estranged. He entered into matrimony and established an independent life. Nicole, his spouse, had consistently been a subdued presence in our lives. Recently, she has begun to assert herself more, marginalizing me in ways I initially overlooked. Every minor choice was taken without my consultation. Everything I uttered appeared to be ignored. However, it was not solely Nicole. James had also undergone transformation. The alteration was not what I anticipated following everything I had done for him. He transitioned from a thankful son to an individual who scarcely recognized my existence unless he required assistance. I never requested much in recompense. A modicum of affection, a measure of appreciation. However, I now doubt he even recalls the woman who endured sleepless nights attending to him. Upon losing my employment owing to age discrimination, I did not anticipate compassion. I was not anticipating a call from James inquiring about my well-being. However, I never anticipated his reaction would be as it was. He was frigid, contemptuous, and accused me of laziness. Mother, you cannot remain idle at this moment. Will you only take advantage of others? Those comments penetrated more profoundly than anything I could have anticipated. I provided him with everything. And now he refers to me as a burden. It was akin to a slap across my face. Nevertheless, more profoundly, it resembled a definitive farewell to the son I once recognized. I averted my gaze, stifling tears. I wished to conceal my vulnerability from him. However, when I exited, an internal rupture occurred within me. I had relinquished considerable sacrifices for him, yet I would no longer permit him or anybody else to deprive me. I would not remain in a place where I was unwelcome. A subtle, concealed aspect of my being murmured that it was time to reclaim my life. I never anticipated that the day I informed James of my job loss would conclude in this manner. I had always believed that whatever of circumstances, I would be his mother and steadfast support. It felt as though the foundation was being removed from beneath me, causing me to falter in my attempt to remain steady. It was a tranquil afternoon when I contacted him, seated in my small motel room. My heart was burdened, not alone by the loss of my employment, but by the apprehension of the potential impact of this news on James. He had consistently relied on me at difficult times, although I saw, intrinsically, that he was approaching a stage where my support was becoming less essential. That notion instilled fear in me. James, I must convey something to you. I began, my voice quavering as I entered his number. I was terminated from my employment today. A prolonged silence ensued on the opposite end of the line. I heard him inhale deeply before he began, his tone calm and dismissive. Why would you take that action? Mother, he inquired. The amount was $8,000 per month. What is your current plan? I was astonished. It was not the apprehension I had anticipated. There was no inquiry on your well-being or offers of assistance. The tone was incisive, causing my stomach to churn. He urged you to cease your risky behavior. I find it hard to comprehend. You intend to remain idle now. Correct, I experienced a flush on my face. His words struck me with the force of a slap. I was struggling for existence, attempting to determine my future steps, while he regarded me as if I had squandered everything. James, I have been employed for years. This occurrence was not my desire. However, I will ascertain a solution, I stated, endeavoring to maintain a composed tone. Are you discerning the solution? In what manner? I am already managing sufficient challenges. Mother, he retorted, Nicole and I are endeavoring to resolve our issues. And now this complication arises. Are you merely going to exacerbate the stress? What were your expectations? I sensed the stress escalating in my chest. The wrath was escalating, and I had to struggle to suppress it. James, I am not requesting anything from you. I wish to inform you of the recent events. I believed it necessary to inform you. Indeed, you ought to have considered it prior to resigning, he retorted. One cannot simply abandon all responsibilities and anticipate that we will resolve the ensuing complications. This is not the correct procedure. You remain in excellent condition. Mother, simply return to your employment. Why must I contend with this? The decision is yours. The remarks pierced, yet I remained silent for a minute, allowing them to resonate. I had to struggle to suppress my tears. I was determined not to reveal the extent of my pain to him. I would no longer serve as his punching bag. It appears to be a positive development. I no longer require your dependence. Correct, I ultimately spoke, my tone subdued yet firm. I no longer need to concern myself with you. The stillness on the opposite end of the telephone was overwhelming. For a moment, I believed he may articulate a response, perhaps an apology. However, I instead heard him murmur, I simply do not comprehend why you did not prioritize us initially. I have consistently prioritized you, James, but I did not articulate it. I simply terminated the call. That night, I gazed at the walls of my hotel room, experiencing an unprecedented sense of solitude. I devoted my entire life to him. Yet now I am merely a bother, a burden, and nothing beyond that. However, an inward realization occurred. This situation transcended mere job loss. It was about ultimately perceiving the reality. I was no longer involved in their lives. I was not the mother they could rely on, at least not in their perception. For numerous years, I permitted myself to remain inconspicuous, serving as their emotional and financial safety net. However, that is no longer the case. I have a concealed fortune that remained unknown to others. The bequest from Catherine, which I had concealed, was a key, a crucial element to a reality more expansive than I could have envisioned. an essential element for ultimate liberation. The following morning, I reached a decision. I would no longer be their doormat. I refused to return as their emotional support. I had completed my task, ceased being exploited, ceased sacrificing for individuals who regarded me merely as an instrument. It was time to commence living for myself. It was early evening when I collected my belongings. The little hotel room resembled a confinement, its walls constricting around me with each fleeting moment. For the past few days, I have been attempting to determine the subsequent course of action. Yet, despite the concealed wealth I unearthed, I still felt a sense of astonishment. Abandoning all was a significant decision, although I had no alternative at this juncture. I would not return to them. I summoned a taxi to transport me to my former apartment, the one I had sold years prior, which I had retained for the sake of nostalgia. I needed to get several items I had left behind before proceeding. Upon my arrival, the door emitted the familiar creak it had consistently produced. I had not visited this location in several months. The void of it struck me abruptly. Memories surged forward. The interminable hours spent with James throughout his illness, the subdued dinners, the laughter that previously resonated in this area. At that moment, I stood in the doorway with no option but to proceed forth. The flat seemed more subdued than I recalled, the silence now laden with past events. I traversed the confined area, caressing the possessions I had previously valued. Images of James throughout his childhood, the vintage family photographs I had meticulously assembled. The corners of my mouth quivered, although I swiftly removed the tear that was poised to fall. It was no longer the same. I am no longer the individual I once was. I invested considerable effort only to get at this outcome. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket, the tremor coursing through my body. The message originated from James. I apologize. Mother, I understand emotions escalated, but I kindly request your return. Nicole and I wish to rectify the situation. I gazed at the message for what seemed like an eternity. A portion of me desired to return and absolve him. I may have erred in distancing myself from him. Although I inherently understood that I could not do so, I had to maintain my position. The moment has arrived for me to embody my true self. Not the mother who relinquished all, but the woman who cultivated her own existence. One she could construct independently, free from the burdens of external expectations. I responded, my fingers quivering slightly as I typed. I am finished, James. I am unable to return. I must prioritize my own existence today. I cannot continue to give without receiving anything in return. I pressed send and gazed at the screen, anticipating his reply. I did not anticipate his comprehension. I did not anticipate an apology. I had already bid farewell inside. This was the final occasion. In that moment, a transformation occurred within me. I was no longer the same lady who had departed from this apartment. I had become more resilient and self-sufficient. I packed the last of my belongings, including a small photo album I had concealed for years. Upon exiting the flat for the final occasion, I glanced back at the edifice one last time. It was once a home. Now, it is merely a location I inhabited. The taxi journey back to the motel was indistinct. I sensed the gravity of my actions, yet simultaneously experienced an unusual tranquility. The world now seemed altered. I was no longer constrained by my past. I was no longer compelled to feign the persona that others desired. While seated in the cab, gazing out the window, I contemplated my forthcoming actions. The inheritance from Catherine, the concealed money, marked the commencement of my liberation. No one was aware of it. It was unnecessary for anyone to be informed about it. I possessed the means to reconstruct my life. I could manifest something novel, something I had perpetually envisioned but lacked the audacity to pursue. I was finished being undervalued and overlooked. I possessed my future, and this time, it would be dictated by my own conditions. I devoted the subsequent days to acclimating to my new regimen. The motel room was little, and although it was modest, it belonged to me. I was not accountable to anyone. I was unconcerned about obstructing others or being asked to vacate the premises. It was serene, nearly tranquil in its own manner. However, there was an additional factor that was compelling me. The funds, the inheritance of Catherine. Upon discovering it, I experienced a blend of admiration and remorse. The currency transcended mere monetary value. It was a crucial support. It served as my refuge. However, it also signified that I have the authority to ultimately seize control of my life. I was not dependent on James. I no longer required reliance on others. I had not yet obtained the comprehensive specifics of the inheritance, only the fundamental aspects. The original paperwork were supplied to me by Catherine's attorney. However, there remained a considerable amount of knowledge that eluded me. One evening, following an exhaustive day of contemplation and restlessness in my cramped hotel room, I resolved to proceed. I accessed the folder provided by the lawyer and commenced a thorough examination of its contents. It was not merely a monetary amount. The inheritance encompassed assets, a trust fund, and a secret account that Catherine established exclusively for me. I felt as though I had unearthed a concealed gem in plain view. However, what impacted me most was a note concealed at the rear of the folder. The correspondence originated from Catherine herself, directed to me. It transcended mere financial considerations. It was an unexpected message. I have observed you throughout these years. Laura, I have observed the sacrifices you have made and the anguish you have experienced. You have contributed significantly to others, but now it is your opportunity. This capital is merely a first investment. Utilize it judiciously, but bear in mind that your value extends beyond your contributions to others. It resides within your identity. Prioritize your own existence in the now and refrain from dwelling on the past. I gazed at the letter, allowing the words to permeate my understanding. Catherine seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of my immediate needs for reassurance. She had provided me with more than mere financial assistance. She granted me the autonomy to lead my own life. After years, I experienced an internal awakening, perhaps hope, or the commencement of a novel endeavor. The more I read, the more I recognized the extent of Catherine's sacrifices for me. Not alone for my future security, but also to facilitate the restoration of my independence. The estate now belonged entirely to me. There were no conditions imposed. The funds had been lawfully transferred to my name, and there was nothing anyone could do to contest it. Neither James, not Nicole, nor anyone else. A torrent of emotions overwhelmed me simultaneously. Relief, incredulity, and an unprecedented sensation of empowerment. I was no longer subject to James's wrath or Nicole's deceit. I had the liberty to pursue my desires and construct the life I had always envisioned. However, the newfound freedom presented a novel issue. How should I utilize this newly acquired wealth? What was I intending to do with all of it? I did not wish to merely leave it unused and let it to gather dust. I sought to effectuate a significant transformation in my life. I aspired to create something significant, something that would belong solely to me. I reached a decision. I would purchase a modest residence by the coast, in a tranquil location where I could genuinely begin anew. I had always desired to reside near the water. The contemplation of it pacified me, assuaged me. It was a place where I might attain tranquility, distant from the clamor and strain of my past. The subsequent decision was rather more personal. I intended to keep the entirety of my fortune confidential, including from James. They were unworthy of the knowledge. This belonged to me, a reward I had attained through years of sacrifice. It was not intended for them. It was intended for me. The following morning, I contacted a real estate agent, organized the necessary arrangements, and soon found myself with a new residence, a modest dwelling adjacent to the ocean. It was not substantial. However, it was ideal for me. I no longer felt the need to justify myself to anyone. I required no one's endorsement. With such contemplation, I recognized a significant insight. I was not merely fleeing from my past. I was sprinting toward my future, a world in which I would ultimately prioritize my own needs. The days merged indistinctly following my relocation to the modest residence by the sea. It was a modest cottage featuring a weathered wooden porch and a vista of the waves colliding with the shoreline. However, it belonged to me. After years, I finally experienced a sense of control over my life. The saline atmosphere and the auditory presence of the water served as a soothing remedy for my spirit, alleviating the accumulated pain of the years. I spent my mornings strolling along the beach, allowing the cool waves to caress my toes and feeling the sand change beneath me. Each step felt like a departure from the past, distancing myself from the individual I formerly was, the one who perpetually gave without receiving anything in return. The tranquility was restorative, yet there was an additional element present, an escalating anticipation regarding forthcoming events. For the first time, I began to contemplate my own identity. What was my desire? What was required of me? I had consistently prioritized the needs of others initially for my son, followed by James and Nicole, neglecting my own well-being in the process. At this point, I was solely accountable to myself. I commenced modestly. I decluttered the house, disposing of unnecessary items. The rooms were devoid of clutter, and there were no reminders of the life I had abandoned. While I labored, I experienced a sense of buoyancy that I had not encountered in years. This residence, this existence, was mine to mold. One afternoon, I resolved to stroll into the adjacent town. It was a quaint, tranquil locale featuring a few of stores and a cafe adjacent to the sea. It was a town where familiarity prevailed, yet inquiries were scarce. I appreciated that. The anonymity was invigorating. I entered the cafe, got a coffee, and seated myself near the window. Seeing the world pass by. The individuals here were distinct. They were not preoccupied with the clamor of their own existence or the need to advance. They were satisfied, at tranquility with themselves. It was a rhythm I had not experienced in years, and I desired to partake in it. As I consumed my coffee, I observed a poster on the bulletin board regarding a community garden initiative. They sought volunteers. I smiled inside. Although it was a minor gesture, it seemed an ideal means of engaging with the community. It served as a means for me to contribute without depleting my resources. I could assist, but I would not compromise my identity in the process. I enrolled, experiencing a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. I have always cherished gardening. It evoked memories of when James was young and we would cultivate flowers together in the garden. Those were the uncomplicated times. Before to the onset of complexity, in the ensuing days, I tended to the garden. The individuals were benevolent, and it was evident they were indifferent to my history. They were unaware of the circumstances surrounding my expulsion from my son's residence. Nor was it necessary for them to be informed. They perceived me as I am now, only another neighbor, another somebody endeavoring to create something positive from life. In the evenings, I reclined on the porch of my new residence, observing the sunset. The hues in the sky varied consistently, yet they remained exquisite. It served as a reminder that regardless of the difficulties encountered, beauty persists in the world, provided one takes the time to observe it. I occasionally reflected on James, particularly on his treatment of me and his subsequent abandonment. I contemplated whether he missed me, but I swiftly dismissed the notion. I could not continue residing in the past. I could no longer permit him and Nicole to exert influence over my life. Subsequently, there existed the financial assets. Catherine's wealth. It was secure, confined for the time being. I preferred not to dwell on it extensively. Although I recognized it as a resource at my disposal, it was not merely a cushion. It represented my liberation. It would enable me to pursue the aspirations I have always envisioned, but never had the opportunity to realize. I commenced formulating strategies. Initially modest, perhaps a few excursions, discovering new locales, and gaining self-awareness in an unprecedented manner. However, with further contemplation, I recognized that I was capable of achieving more. I could utilize the funds to develop something significant, something that would provide me with a sense of purpose. I might initiate a modest enterprise, or I might traverse the globe. Whichever option I selected, it would ultimately belong to me. The recognition that I could pursue my desires seemed like the first genuine breath of freedom I had experienced in years. Several weeks had elapsed since I relocated to the coastal residence, and I had acclimated to my new routine. The days were uncomplicated and tranquil. I devoted my mornings to gardening and my afternoons to strolling along the sea. It was the life I had always envisioned, one devoid of the clamor and strain of the world. I am able to respire in this location. However, tranquility is frequently disrupted by matters we would prefer to overlook. One evening, while I was seated on the porch relishing the diminishing sunlight, my phone called. The number displayed on the screen was unfamiliar, yet it elicited a palpable flutter in my heart. I recognized the caller prior to answering. James. I paused briefly, the familiar burden of past feelings weighing heavily upon me. I devoted numerous years to him, sacrificing all that I possessed. He was phoning, and I was aware it was not to inquire about my well-being. It was never the case. He contacted only when he required assistance. I exhaled and responded, endeavoring to maintain a neutral tone. Greetings, Mother, James remarked, his voice nearly inaudible. I had been contemplating extensively the events that transpired. I observe. I apologize. The situation escalated uncontrollably. Both Nicole and I erred. May we converse? My abdomen constricted. His tone was composed, nearly contrite, yet I caught the latent desperation in his voice, the type that emerges when one recognizes a loss of control over a situation. I reclined in my chair, gazing at the ocean while I listened. A portion of me desired to acquiesce and listen to him, yet the more dominant aspect was recalling all that I had endured. The sacrifices and incessant contributions were discarded like refuse once I ceased to be advantageous. What is it, James? I inquired, my tone unwavering. What do you require from me? A prolonged silence ensued on the other end. I could perceive the sound of his respiration, his indecision. Mother, we require assistance. Nicole and I are in a difficult situation. We are delinquent on our financial obligations, and the situation is deteriorating. I am uncertain about the appropriate course of action. I was hoping you could assist us. Merely a small amount, I acknowledge my mistakes. But we are facing significant difficulties. I had constriction in my chest. There it was. The familiar pattern. The identical one that had recurred countless times previously. He expressed no remorse. He was not seeking absolution. He solicited funds. No, I asserted emphatically, my voice piercing the silence. I am unable to assist you, James. What is it? He appeared astonished. Mother, please hurry. We are kin. You have consistently supported me. Do you not care about us? I do care, I asserted, my voice becoming more resolute. But I cannot continue to give. I have devoted everything to you, James. And now it is time for me to prioritize my own well-being. I am not your financial institution. I am no longer your safety net. A pause ensued. I sensed the heaviness of the stillness on the opposite end. For a brief time, I anticipated that he might genuinely apologize for everything. But then I heard it. You fail to comprehend, Mother, he asserted, his tone escalating. You have consistently centered everything around yourself. You fail to comprehend. Nicole and I are endeavoring to build a life together, while you are recklessly discarding it all. You are egocentric. I require your support, yet you remain indifferent. I shut my eyes, attempting to restrain the surge of emotions poised to overflow. His comments were incisive and frigid, penetrating me more profoundly than anything he had before uttered. Yet I resolved not to allow him to influence me anymore. This time, no, James, I stated softly yet resolutely. You are not entitled to label me as selfish. You cannot shift the blame onto me. I have been entirely unselfish for years, and now I am reclaiming my life. You cannot continue to exploit me. A prolonged silence ensued, and for the first time, I detected a tremor in his voice. I apologize, Mother. I did not intend it in that manner. I am uncertain on what actions to do next. I require your assistance. I sensed my heart melt. However, I promptly dismissed the emotion. He was afforded an opportunity. He possessed every opportunity to regard me as a maternal figure, as someone of significance, yet he squandered it. James, I apologize, I stated, my tone firm yet unwavering. But I am finished. I have devoted all my resources to you. And now it is my turn. I am finished being the individual who is perpetually available when you require assistance. You'll have to figure it out on your own. I hung up the phone without waiting for a response, my heart thumping in my chest. It appeared conclusive. I felt as though I had cut the final connection that had tethered me to him. For the first time in years, I wasn't running after someone who couldn't love me back. I wasn't being utilized. I had taken back my control, and it felt damn wonderful. It had been a week since I severed relations with James, and though the stillness was deafening at times, it seemed like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't always walking on eggshells, thinking about what James and Nicole wanted or how I was meant to fix their problems. It was weird, but in a good way. I spent much of my time unpacking and getting the place established. There was still a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a rush. I could take my time, do things at my own pace. The surf waves outside were my daily soundtrack, a reminder of how much I had earned by walking away from the life I had built around them. But just when I thought I could finally breathe easy, I received a phone call that threatened to disrupt everything. It was late in the afternoon, and I had just finished planting some lavender by the porch when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a local number, one I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Hello, is this Laura Hayes?" The voice on the other end was smooth, perhaps too smooth. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Janet. I work for the law company representing the estate of Catherine Hayes." The name hit me like a jolt. Catherine. But she had already passed. Why would somebody be phoning me from her estate? "We've been trying to get in touch with you. It's about some additional information about your inheritance." Janet continued, "There are some topics we need to discuss. Could you come in for a meeting tomorrow? We have some paperwork for you to sign." I felt my chest tighten. What may this be about? I hadn't anticipated to deal with Catherine's estate any further. Everything had been settled. But something about the way Janet spoke raised a flag in my mind. Why the sudden urgency? I wasn't expecting this. "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I apologized for the confusion. "There's been a mix-up in the papers. It's nothing important, just a formality. We'll explain everything when you come." I agreed to meet with her the next day, though the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I had been so concentrated on starting my new life that I had nearly forgotten about the inheritance, but now it seemed to be catching up with me. The next morning, I drove to the legal office, my thoughts racing with questions I couldn't answer. When I walked into the sleek, futuristic facility, I felt out of place. I had spent so many years working in houses, cleaning for others. Now I was the one sitting opposite from a lawyer in a nice office. It was odd, but I was starting to grasp that I had earned this moment. I had deserved everything that was about to happen. Janet welcomed me with a false smile, and I could see instantly that something was off. She had the look of someone who was supposed to be professional, yet there was an underlying strain in her stance. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hayes. Please have a seat," she replied, referring to a chair across from her desk. I sat down, feeling my palms sweat. "So, what's this about?" I asked, my voice calm but forceful. "Well," Janet started, flicking through a stack of papers on her desk. "It appears that there are some additional funds related to the estate. Some assets that were not reported earlier." I frowned. "What do you mean, everything was settled?" Janet hesitated, and for a second, I feared she may backtrack. But then she continued, her eyes flicking toward the door as though she wanted to make sure no one overheard. "There's a property. Catherine didn't only leave you money, she also left you a piece of land. It's incredibly precious. But there's a catch." Her voice sank, as if she was ready to share a grave secret. "There are other people who claim it's theirs, and they are already trying to fight the bequest." My mind spun. Other people. What was she talking about? Catherine had never mentioned anything like this. "And who are these individuals?" I asked, attempting to keep the sharpness out of my voice. "They're, well, individuals from Catherine's past, people she had links with long before she met you. You know, the estate has been under review, and some say Catherine didn't have the right to give this land to you." I leaned forward, my pulse accelerating. "What do you mean?" "Didn't have the right? I was her only heir. There's no one else. That's what we believed." Janet continued, her voice lowering even lower. "But there's a man named Harold Clark. He's been trying to get his hands on the land for years, and now that Catherine is gone, he's making his move." I sat there in shock, trying to understand what I was hearing. Harold Clark. Who was he? And why hadn't Catherine ever mentioned him? We don't know much about him yet, Janet said. But he's involved with some nasty people, and if he wins possession of the property, he might make things extremely tough for you. A frigid shiver coursed down my spine. This transcended mere financial considerations. This pertained to power. Someone was attempting to confiscate it from me. Why did you not inform me of this earlier? I inquired, my voice quivering with a blend of trepidation and ire. We required the documentation to be organized prior to presenting this to you, Janet responded, her tone abruptly more circumspect. However, I must candidly express, Mrs. Hayes, that I do not anticipate this to be a straightforward battle. I rose suddenly, the surge of adrenaline causing my heart to gallop. What actions should I take next? I inquired, my voice trembling with doubt. We can initiate the process of securing the necessary legal protection for you. However, you must be ready for a confrontation. Rest assured, it will not be facile. I nodded, experiencing a burst of resolve within me. No individual was going to deprive me of this. I had struggled throughout my life to reach this juncture, and I would not permit an unfamiliar individual to jeopardize the future I had just commenced to establish. Upon exiting the workplace, I recognized that circumstances were poised to get far more intricate. However, I no longer had fear. I possessed nothing further to forfeit. The subsequent days were a haze of legal terminology and documentation I scarcely comprehended. Janet's comments reverberated in my thoughts. Harold Clark, a somebody with whom I was previously unfamiliar. However, this someone now appeared resolute in seizing what belonged to me. Catherine bequeathed me this inheritance. However, any endeavor to secure it encountered opposition. I could not passively await developments. I was compelled to take action. I dedicated the subsequent days to contacting anyone who could possess additional information regarding Harold Clark and his associations with Catherine. I required clarity regarding my adversary and sought to be equipped for any forthcoming challenges. On the third day following my encounter with Janet, I resolved to take a respite to clear my mind. I had not ventured out frequently since relocating to this coastal town, and I want a change of view. A stroll along the shore often facilitated my contemplation. I donned my jacket and departed, the briny breeze caressing my face as I proceeded along the shoreline. While walking, I encountered several residents who smiled and nodded as they proceeded with their daily activities. The town was little yet possessed a distinct allure. The individuals here did not pose numerous inquiries. It was an environment conducive to anonymity, which was precisely my objective. At that moment, I observed an elderly man seated on a bench adjacent to the pier. He was feeding the seagulls, his visage marked by the passage of time. Yet there was an air of familiarity about him. He appeared to be an individual who had experienced much over his life. An inexplicable impulse compelled me to cease my actions. I paused briefly before approaching him. "Excuse me," I articulated softly. "I hope I am not intruding, but I saw that you appear to be well acquainted with this town." He gazed at me, his eyes narrowing in the intense afternoon sunlight. His look exhibited a subtle awareness, although it did not convey any sense of transgressing boundaries. He stated that he had resided here his entire life, his voice rough yet amiable. "The name is Frank. What are your thoughts?" I seated down next to him, observing the seagulls as they contested the breadcrumbs he scattered for them. The moment's simplicity was inherently relaxing. "I am a newcomer, attempting to adopt a casual demeanor. I have lately relocated nearby. I am attempting to familiarize myself with the neighborhood. I am inquiring if you has any information regarding an individual called Harold Clark." His expression altered instantly. His eyes squinted, and he adjusted slightly on the bench as if contemplating whether to speak. For a brief instant, I believed he might rise and depart, but instead, he inclined closer. He murmured, "Harold Clark." "Are you inquiring about him?" I acquiesced. "Affirmative. I have recently encountered his name, and it has been associated with a significant matter. I am attempting to comprehend his identity and possibly the reasons for his sudden interest in my wealth." Frank hesitated for an extended while, his gaze oscillating between the seagulls and the horizon. He gradually turned to confront me, his voice descending to a whisper. "Are you connected to Catherine Hayes?" A shiver coursed through me upon hearing Catherine's name. What was the source of his knowledge? My thoughts accelerated, and I endeavored to maintain a composed expression. "Affirmative," I responded with caution. "Catherine bequeathed me an item upon her demise, but a somebody called Harold Clark is now asserting a claim to it." Frank's expression became grave as his calloused hands gripped the breadcrumbs firmly. "Harold Clark poses a problem. He had pursued the land for years. He is the type of individual who persists till he attains his desires. Upon discovering your involvement, he will pursue his objectives relentlessly." I experienced an accelerated heartbeat. "What is your meaning? Who is this individual?" Frank inhaled deeply, as though he were consolidating the fortitude to articulate a burden he had long carried. "He is not merely a businessman. Harold Clark is a former associate of Catherine, and a significantly former one at that. They engaged in transactions years prior, matters that remain unspoken. However, I must convey that he is not an individual you wish to antagonize. If he is interested in that property, it is due to its greater value than you see." I leaned forward, the words suspended weightily in the atmosphere. "What is the significance of that? What distinguishes it?" Frank surveyed his surroundings, seemingly apprehensive that someone may eavesdrop on us. He inclined closer. "There exists land beneath that property, land that was formerly part of a larger entity, an undisclosed asset. Catherine was aware of it, although she concealed the information. None were aware, not even her most intimate companions. However, Harold, he has been seeking that land for years, and if he locates it, he will do whatever is necessary to acquire it." I reclined, attempting to comprehend all that he had just conveyed to me. My head was in a state of disorientation. Concealed assets. Catherine have knowledge about this land that I lacked. Harold Clark desired it. "What is the source of your knowledge?" I inquired, my tone subdued. Frank offered a faint, fatigued smile. "I have existed for an extended period, Laura. I have witnessed and overheard several occurrences. Some individuals prefer to disregard the past, while others are unable to do so." I rose, my legs unsteady. "Thank you, Frank. I am uncertain of what to articulate." He acquiesced, his expression becoming gentler. "Exercise caution, and if you wish to retain that property, you must be prepared. Harold Clark disregards the established regulations. Do not permit him to seize it from you." As I departed, I sensed the gravity of Frank's remarks permeating my thoughts. Harold Clark was not merely a businessman nor an opportunist. He was a perilous individual. Consequently, I felt compelled to contend for what rightfully belonged to me. The subsequent days following my discussion with Frank felt tumultuous. I could not dispel the lingering anxiety, and I saw the necessity of being prepared. Harold Clark sought more than only a parcel of property. He sought something significantly more valuable than I had comprehended. Catherine concealed something from everyone, including myself. I devoted hours to meticulously examining every document related to Catherine's estate in an effort to assemble the jigsaw. The admonition from Frank reverberated in my thoughts. Harold Clark would relent at no obstacle to attain his desires. The notion sent a chill through my veins. However, I was not inclined to concede. Not after all I had endured. That evening, as I commenced another series of calls to attorneys, my phone vibrated. The numeral displayed on the screen was unrecognizable. My heart raced upon witnessing it. I paused momentarily. I had not received any communication from him since our previous discussion, and the fury I experienced at that time remained vivid in my memory. However, I recognized that I could not evade him indefinitely. He remained my son. Ultimately, I responded to the phone, attempting to maintain composure. "Greetings, Mother," James remarked, his tone more subdued than I anticipated. "I have reflected about the events and regret my treatment of you. I ought to have been present for you. I was not contemplating. May we converse?" I exhaled deeply. His remarks surprised me. For a brief instant, I nearly accepted his assertion. I hoped he was finally acknowledging the errors he had committed. However, an element in his tone seemed unsettling. It appeared too scripted, excessively simple. I am uncertain if there remains anything further to articulate. "James," I responded, my tone composed yet cautious. "You have made your selections. You have revealed your true character to me. I cannot continue to revisit that. Mother, I acknowledge my mistakes, but I am endeavoring to rectify the situation." He asserted his sincerity. "I require your assistance." I experienced a sudden discomfort in my chest at his remarks. However, it was neither the discomfort of affection nor compassion. It was the acute awareness of truth. The veracity was evident to me now. He was not seeking absolution. He was inquiring about an other matter. I was reluctant to acknowledge it, yet I was fully aware of his intentions. "I am unable to assist you, James," I stated, my tone becoming stern. "No more. You have received the maximum assistance I can provide." A momentary delay led me to briefly consider that he might accept my response. However, his voice grew increasingly urgent. "Are you truly going to abandon me in this manner, Mother?" His tone altered, now imbued with an undertone of frustration. "You have consistently been my reliable support. I am your son, and I am uncertain about your intentions. You cannot simply abandon me." The remarks pierced, yet I remained unperturbed. I had listened sufficiently. I refused to allow him to influence me any longer. "I am not departing, James," I stated emphatically. "I am now prioritizing my own needs. I have devoted my entire life to prioritizing the needs of others over my own, and I am finished with that. You must ascertain the solution independently." Silence prevailed on the opposite end of the line. I could discern James's labored respiration. However, he remained silent for an extended period. At last, he said another word, his tone subdued and resigned. "You fail to comprehend, do you not? I am not want financial assistance. I am seeking familial support. And you have simply vanished." I inhaled deeply. My hands formed into fists. "You have had family, James, and you have had me. However, you have abandoned it, and now it is my opportunity to depart." I terminated the call without awaiting a reply. My chest felt constricted and my hands quivered slightly. Although my heart exhibited no hesitancy, I made the correct decision. As I sat there, the gravity of the call permeating my thoughts, I recognized that I had genuinely relinquished my hold for an extended period. I endeavored to rectify all matters for James, striving to be the exemplary mother, but I have now reached my limit. I had supported him at critical times, and he discarded it all. I was no longer his support. I was no longer a support for anyone. That was emancipating. The silence in the home was overwhelming following my chat with James. The gravity of the recent events lingered in the atmosphere like a dense cloud, while simultaneously, I had an unforeseen sense of comfort. I had ultimately accomplished what was necessary, severing the bond that had been burdening me for an extended period. However, despite my presence amid the tranquility of my new residence, the sensation of serenity proved ephemeral. The disconcerting incidents with Harold Clark, the peculiar remarks from Frank, and the duplicitous call from James all burdened me. An unsettling sensation suggested that a more profound issue was at hand, and I sensed that I was overlooking a vital element of the situation. I could not remain passive and await developments. The inheritance, Catherine's wealth, this enigmatic territory. All elements were interrelated, and I required elucidation. The discomfort within me intensified daily. That evening, I occupied the kitchen table, perusing the documents pertaining to Catherine's estate. I had already reviewed them, but I required a subsequent examination, this time with a definitive objective. I retrieved the manila folder with the legal documents and the note that Catherine had composed for me. Her remarks continued to resonate in my thoughts. Your value lies not alone in your contributions to others, but in your own character. I was attempting to comprehend everything when the doorbell rang. I was not anticipating anyone, and the time was very fortuitous. The abrupt noise shocked me. I rose, my heart racing. Who might it be? I approached the door, my hand resting on the doorknob. Upon opening the door, I was astonished to find a man on my doorstep, grasping a small package. His appearance was sufficiently unremarkable, tall in a suit that appeared excessively formal for a little seaside town. Nonetheless, there was an indefinable quality in his stance and inscrutable demeanor that instilled a sense of unease within me. "Good evening, Mrs. Hayes," he stated, his tone composed and professional. "I am William Hart, employed by the legal company managing Catherine Hayes' estate. I presume you have been anticipating some documents." I blinked, astonished. I was not anticipating anyone, particularly not a representative from the law firm. "Indeed," I affirmed, my tone measured. "I have been collaborating with Janet, but I did not anticipate anything this evening," William acknowledged, his smile failing to illuminate his eyes. "This is an urgent package containing several documents that necessitate your prompt attention. It is imperative that you examine them at your earliest convenience." He presented me with the diminutive box. "Kindly review, and should you want any assistance, please feel free to reach out to us." Prior to my response, he pivoted and departed, vanishing into the diminishing twilight of the evening. I paused momentarily, gazing at the box in my hands. The entire discussion felt peculiar. I was uncertain of its nature, although an insistent intuition suggested that this matter extended beyond mere documentation. I entered, shut the door, and meticulously placed the box on the table. Inside, there was a pile of meticulously folded papers accompanied by a note. I initially tore open the letter. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, we trust this greeting reaches you in good health. There are still unresolved issues concerning the estate of your deceased benefactor, Catherine Hayes. A final clause in her will, necessitating your signature, has emerged, despite the majority of the estate having been transferred. Kindly examine the enclosed documents meticulously since they relate to a property that Catherine has acquired on your behalf. We acknowledge the abruptness of this situation. Yet, we recommend prompt action to guarantee a seamless process. Yours faithfully, William Hart. I experienced a sensation of nausea when reading the letter. A concluding provision in her testament. A parcel of land that Catherine had acquired on my behalf. I believed all matters had been resolved. This was unfamiliar, and it felt unsettling to me. Why was Janet not managing this? I placed the letter aside and extracted the other documents. Documents pertaining to land maps, property deeds, and legal descriptions appeared to have been assembled in a hurried manner. The document contained a phrase regarding an easement that I found perplexing, along with ownership references that were inconsistent with Catherine's assertions. My heart momentarily faltered. I sensed the walls constricting around me. This was not merely documentation. It constituted a complex network of legal stratagems. And I recognized that something dubious was occurring. A part of me desired to discard everything, to feign that this was merely an error, but I inherently recognized that I could not overlook it. The name Harold Clark reemerged in the records, concealed within the fine print. He was not merely a claimant. He was an active participant in the legal dispute about this land. I forcefully placed the papers on the table, my hands trembling. Janet, William, Harold Clark, and other participants had engaged in a game for which I was unprepared. This matter extended beyond mere property inheritance. It encompassed a far more significant issue, one that Catherine had concealed from all, and now I found myself ensnared in it. I sought to ascertain the true identity of Harold Clark. I required information regarding his intentions. This had transcended mere inheritance. It had become a struggle for something significantly more perilous. I would not permit him to triumph, neither now nor in the future. The subsequent days resembled a tumultuous whirlwind. Whenever I believed I was nearing comprehension of the matter, an unforeseen development emerged. Harold Clark's name repeatedly appeared in the records, persistently hovering in the background like an inescapable shadow. However, the more I discovered about him, the more I recognized my ignorance. Who was this individual? Truly, what motivated his determination to seize what Catherine bequeathed to me? I had a meeting with Janet arranged, but I was uncertain about what to anticipate. I recognized her lack of complete honesty, yet I felt compelled to seek further clarification. The legal team exhibited dubious behavior from the outset, and I increasingly felt that their allegiance lay more with Harold than with me. Upon entering the law office, I immediately sensed that something was amiss. Janet was absent from her customary desk. I was instead met by an unfamiliar man. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, impeccably attired, exuding a refined professional demeanor. However, his gaze elicited a sense of suspicion within me. "Ms. Hayes?" he inquired, his tone suave, yet nearly excessively amiable. "I am Alex Thompson. I will be providing assistance today. Kindly take a seat." I occupied the chair opposite him, my senses heightened. This did not align with my expectations. What was Janet's location? Why is Alex currently managing my case? "Is there an issue with Janet?" I inquired, attempting to maintain a nonchalant tone. He grinned. However, his eyes remained devoid of warmth. "Janet is now occupied with another case. There is no cause for concern. I assume you would like to proceed with the matter at hand." "Correct?" I acquiesced, but my intuition urged caution. There was a discrepancy. While examining the documents pertaining to Catherine's estate, Alex remarked, as he pushed many papers across the table towards me, "There has been some ambiguity regarding the land. It appears that certain legal technicalities have emerged, and regrettably, Harold Clark is implicated. I tightened my hands under the table, yet maintained a bland expression. I have previously encountered his name. What is his interest in the property? Alex paused momentarily, his gaze flickering to the documents before returning to mine. That is not completely explicit. It is established that Harold Clark has a personal and professional past with Catherine. This is a complex issue, of which I am uncertain you possess complete awareness. I leaned forward, disregarding the pang of frustration in my chest. I seek knowledge. I require information. All things. What was Catherine's involvement with Harold? Alex's demeanor briefly soured, only to be swiftly concealed by a professional smile. I cannot disclose the complete specifics. Nevertheless, it is sufficient to state that Harold Clark has been a persistent nuisance to Catherine for years, and now that she is no longer around, he is attempting to claim what he perceives as his rightful possession. I squinted. Are you assisting him? The inquiry lingered, pointed and accusatory. Alex remained unperturbed. Instead, he reclined in his chair, interlacing his fingers. Negative. Ms. Hayes, I am available to assist you. However, it is imperative to recognize that this matter transcends a mere inheritance dispute. This encompasses a significant amount of history. What is Catherine's testament? It was not solely about providing you with assets. It pertained to safeguarding something significant, something Harold will pursue relentlessly. I could sense my heart thumping in my chest. This exceeded my expectations. It transcended mere financial or territorial considerations. The conflict centered around a significant force, something that Catherine had concealed, something Harold was prepared to sacrifice. What was it? I require clarification on what it is. I stated, my tone composed yet assertive. I seek to understand Harold Clark's unwavering will to seize it from me. Alex paused once more, then exhaled deeply. He gently acknowledged, his tone altering. I was not meant to disclose this information, although I believe you are entitled to be informed. Catherine bequeathed you neither monetary assets nor real estate. She provided you with a key, an essential component of a far greater enigma. A concealed vault contains records and assets that surpass anything you have encountered thus far. A shiver coursed through me. A secure storage facility? Indeed, Harold is aware of it. He's been trying to get his hands on those documents for years. But Catherine made sure that only you could access it. The location of the vault is known exclusively to you. I reclined, astonished. This was no longer merely about a piece of land or some inheritance. It pertained to something significantly more precious, an element capable of transforming everything. Why am I the chosen one? I whispered more to myself than to Alex. Why did she leave it to me? Alex leaned in, his voice low. Because you were her sole confidant. She recognized your strength to safeguard it. Although now you must exercise caution. Individuals are pursuing it. Individuals willing to go to great lengths to obtain it, with Harold Clark merely representing the surface of the issue. The words lingered in the atmosphere, laden with significance. I felt as though I had merely discovered a fragment of the jigsaw, yet I still lacked the complete set of parts. What contents were housed within this vault? And what motivated Harold's intense desire for them? I gazed at Alex, my thoughts in turmoil. What is the method to reach it? He faltered once more, his eyes averting. I cannot provide all the solutions, but I can convey this information. To locate the vault and safeguard what Catherine bequeathed to you, you must be ready to engage in combat. You are contending with more than just Harold Clark. There are further, more influential individuals implicated. You cannot accomplish it independently. My heart thumped in my chest. this transcended mere inheritance. This pertained to a matter that could alter the trajectory of all things. However, one aspect was unequivocal. I refused to allow anyone to appropriate what was properly mine. Not Harold, not just anyone. I exited the law office with the sensation that my reality had been upended. All that Alex conveyed profoundly unsettled me. A concealed vault, influential individuals engaged, and Harold Clark at the center of it all. This was more than just inheritance. I was unprepared to engage in that game. Nevertheless, I found myself deeply immersed in the situation. I could not remain passive and await developments to retain my possessions. I needed to be proactive. The vault, the documents, and the assets need safeguarding. However, I was uncertain about where to commence. I have no leads and lacked a defined course of action. The more I contemplated, the more I recognized my limited knowledge regarding Catherine's life, particularly her interactions with Harold Clark. Why had Catherine never disclosed such a significant secret if it was concealed? Why had I not been adequately prepared for any of this? I devoted the subsequent days to meticulously examining every document in the estate, seeking any information that could guide me appropriately. I was aware that clues must be concealed inside the documentation. Catherine had left a trail for me to pursue. However, nothing was very appealing to me. It was entirely composed of legal jargon and intricate details. No responses, no clues. On the fourth day following my conversation with Alex, I resolved to revisit the local cafe. I required a temporary escape from my thoughts. The incessant rumination was driving me to madness. A change of environment may be beneficial. I entered the cafe, ordered my customary black coffee without sugar, and located an unoccupied seat near the window. While observing the world around me, I endeavored to clear my mind. The cafe was inviting and comfortable, a venue where inquiries were unnecessary, allowing patrons to simply sit and exist. I sipped my coffee and sighed, momentarily closing my eyes. Subsequently, I perceived it. I was being observed. I opened my eyes, surveyed the room, and then I observed him. Frank, the elderly man I had encountered on the shore. He occupied a corner table, with a newspaper positioned before him. His eyes were locked onto mine, and the intensity of his look caused a tightening sensation in my stomach. I briefly contemplated approaching him. He appeared somewhat enigmatic during our initial conversation. However, there was now an additional element in his expression, something pressing. I had come to rely on my intuition, which indicated that Frank possessed more knowledge than he was revealing. I rose and approached his table. Upon my arrival, he raised his gaze, his demeanor becoming gentler. "Ah, there you are," he remarked, indicating the vacant chair opposite him. "Approach and take a seat." I paused, then extracted the chair and seated myself. "What is occurring, Frank? You appear to have something significant to communicate to me." He placed the newspaper aside and leaned forward. "I have been monitoring the situation. Laura, I was reluctant to engage, but after learning about Harold Clark, I believe you are entitled to the truth." My heart momentarily faltered. What is the truth regarding Frank surveyed the cafe, his gaze shifting anxiously as if assessing if anyone was eavesdropping. He stated softly that he had known Catherine long before you did. We were near. She was not merely a wealthy donor, you understand. She was engaged in activities that would likely disturb most individuals if they were aware of the reality. What about Harold Clark? He is more than only a businessman. He is a predator who has pursued Catherine's wealth for years. I inclined forward, my heartbeat accelerating. What is your meaning? In what activities was Catherine engaged? Frank paused, his fingers tapping gently on the table. Catherine was not consistently the amiable, charitable individual you recognized. She possessed her secrets. Her connections to Clark date back to their youth. An ancient agreement existed, pertaining to property, yet also encompassing a more perilous element, a subject Catherine consistently avoided discussing. Something she may not have comprehended herself entirely. I sensed my hands trembling. What type of agreement? Why did she never disclose this to me? Frank's gaze softened, reflecting a blend of remorse and apprehension. Catherine was attempting to safeguard you. Laura, she was aware that disclosing the complete narrative would jeopardize your safety. The territory, the repository, it is all interconnected within a network of influential individuals. Harold Clark is not the sole individual pursuing it. There are others, far more malevolent. And now that Catherine has departed, they will cease at nothing to obtain what they believe is rightfully theirs. A frigid tremor coursed down my spine. This matter transcends just financial considerations. It pertains to a somewhat larger matter. Frank acquiesced. Precisely. You are currently at the center of it. I am conveying this information to ensure your preparedness, to safeguard what Catherine bequeathed to you. It is imperative to undertake more than only retaining the property. You must contend for it. I fear you will not be able to accomplish it independently. I swallowed with difficulty, attempting to comprehend all that Frank had just articulated. What do you recommend I undertake? Frank reclined in his chair, his expression a blend of apprehension and resolve. Initially, you must get the documents that Catherine bequeathed. The repository? A key is concealed in an undisclosed location. It is necessary for you to locate it. Upon doing so, you will be equipped to safeguard yourself against Harold Clark and anyone pursuing you. I experienced an accelerated heartbeat, a secure storage chamber, an essential instrument. The components were beginning to align, yet it remained overwhelming. I was compelled to place my trust in Frank. He appeared to be the sole individual possessing knowledge beyond what he said. I rose, the gravity of the discussion pressing upon my chest. Thank you, Frank. I am uncertain of the implications at present, but I will do any necessary actions to safeguard what Catherine bequeathed to me. You must exhibit strength. Laura, he stated, rising to his feet. Bear in mind that your struggle transcends just financial gain. You are battling for your survival. Upon exiting the cafe, I was unable to dispel the apprehension that circumstances were poised to become significantly more perilous. The game was merely commencing, and I needed to be prepared for whatever ensued. A few days had elapsed since my discussion with Frank, and events were progressing rapidly. The reality of Catherine's estate, the concealed vault, Harold Clark, and the influential individuals involved. They resembled fragments of a puzzle I was beginning to assemble. However, the more I acquired knowledge, the more I comprehended the extent of the peril I faced. I had not disclosed the existence of the vault to anyone, even the attorney. Not at this time. I recognized the necessity of resolving it independently. Frank cautioned me that entire faith in anyone was unwarranted. Each one has their own objectives, and I could not permit myself to lower my defenses at this moment. While seated in my new living room, encircled by the accumulated mounds of documents, I once more gazed at the piece of paper that had initiated everything, the correspondence from Catherine. I traced my fingertips over the passages that had held significant meaning when I initially encountered them. This is your moment. Laura, Prioritize your own needs at present. Catherine was aware. She had anticipated the impending event. Even in my ignorance, it was now my responsibility to safeguard her legacy. I retrieved the phone and dialed the number provided by Frank. I was poised to venture further into uncharted area, yet I had no alternative. I was compelled to undertake this task. The alternative was permitting Harold Clark and any accomplices to seize everything from me. "Greetings," a voice responded from the opposite end. "This is Laura Hayes," I stated, endeavoring to maintain a steady tone. "I was informed that I may contact someone at this number regarding the vault." A momentary quiet was succeeded by a profound sigh. "Are you certain you wish to pursue this course of action? This decision should not be made carelessly. I lack alternatives," I asserted, my tone resolute. "I require information regarding the location of the vault and the means to access it." Another hiatus. "Please adhere to my instructions meticulously. However, I must clarify something first. You are safeguarding more than merely financial assets or possessions. Should you discover what you want, you will encounter an even more perilous situation than your current one." I tightened my fists. "I am prepared." The individual on the opposite end of the telephone emitted a hesitant giggle. "I trust you are. For once you go on that initial step, there is no return. The key you seek, it is not readily accessible. It is concealed in a location that Catherine believed no one would discover, not even you first." I experienced a sensation of nausea. "Where is it located?" "It resides in an unexpected location," the voice stated enigmatically. "Apparent yet unnoticed by the majority. You have previously visited that location." "Laura, it is located within your residence. I became immobile. Within my residence." "What is your meaning?" "You must begin to observe more attentively. It has always existed, although you have not perceived it. Seek an ignored location, a site where one would not anticipate concealing something of value." The vault's key is linked to an object Catherine cherished deeply. It is private. I rose, my thoughts in turmoil. My home, my refuge, my fresh start. Was there something concealed here? Is there something I overlooked? The voice persisted, stating that it would not disclose the precise location. "You must discover it independently. Nevertheless, upon doing so, it will direct you to the vault, granting you access to all the answers you want." I had a constriction in my chest. This was genuine. This was occurring. I was nearer than ever to revealing the truth. Yet with each advance, I recognized I was also approaching something perilous, something from which I could not escape. "Thank you," I articulated, my voice little above a murmur. "I will locate it." I terminated the call and remained in the center of the room, my pulse racing in my chest. The walls appeared to constrict, as though encroaching upon me. I was being drawn into an unforeseen realm, yet retreat was no longer an option. I needed to locate the key. The days following my dialogue with the enigmatic voice appeared indistinct. I could contemplate nothing other than the vault and the key concealed someplace within my residence. I had already explored every area of the property, but now I needed to reassess it with a renewed perspective. What did I overlook? Where might it be concealed? I commenced in the living area, removing carpets and inspecting behind the furniture. I even inspected the light fixtures, presuming it would be concealed in an unexpected location. However, nothing was discovered. No concealed compartments, no clandestine drawers, but the same vacant walls and furnishings I had learned to regard as home. Frustration began to surface. However, I suppressed it. I could not afford to lose concentration at this moment. There existed an element here, something Catherine had concealed, had the potential to alter everything. The subsequent day, I returned to the residence, resolute in my quest to locate the key. I had devoted hours contemplating the enigmatic counsel the voice had imparted to me. It has always existed. Seek an ignored location, a site where one would least expect to conceal something of value. I remained motionless in the corridor, gazing at the walls. What was the significance of this? I reflected on my initial move, recalling how my eagerness to acclimate to my new life caused me to overlook the finer things. Perhaps that was the case. I may have been seeking something excessively grand or overt. I needed to consider something more little, intimate, and obscured in plain view. I approached the bookshelves in the living room. The space was populated with antiquarian books, familial artifacts, and several assorted trinkets. Catherine was an avid reader, and during her lifetime, we frequently engaged in discussions about the novels she had read. A book on the shelf attracted my attention. The Secret Garden, authored by Frances Hodgson Burnett. It was one of her favorites, and I smiled inwardly as I recalled her affection for that book. I removed the book from the shelf. First, indifferent, but then an unexpected occurrence transpired. A small metallic item descended from the pages. My pulse raced as I retrieved it. The small, elegant key was affixed to a weathered piece of paper bearing a note inscribed in Catherine's handwriting. The garden serves as your key. The note caused my stomach to churn. The horticultural area. Certainly, Catherine had perpetually cherished her garden. I had passed it daily since my relocation, although I had never seen it as anything beyond a mere pastime. I overlooked the most apparent clue. I swiftly seized the key and exited, my thoughts racing with potential scenarios. The garden was located immediately outside, directly behind the home, nestled in a secluded, tranquil area. I had previously regarded it as a charming, meticulously maintained area, but now I recognized it contained the solutions. I arrived at the garden and surveyed the surroundings. A little shed in the rear was entangled with ivy. It appeared to be unused for years, and I had not given it much consideration until recently. I advanced cautiously, my heart accelerating with every stride. I rotated the corroded knob and pulled the door ajar, the creaking hinges eliciting a shudder up my spine. The interior of the shed was dimly lit, cluttered with antiquated gardening implements and neglected recollections. However, in the distant corner, adjacent to the rear wall, there was a diminutive, concealed entrance. It was obscured by layers of leaves and soil, as though it had been intentionally concealed from sight. I crouched, clearing the rubble. The key I discovered fit seamlessly into the lock. With a resounding click, the trapdoor opened, exposing a small wooden staircase descending into the abyss. I experienced hesitation. My heart quickened as I gazed at the staircase. This was the moment. The anticipated moment has arrived. All that was concealed, all that I failed to comprehend, awaited me below. I inhaled deeply and advanced. The stairs groaned beneath my weight, and the air became increasingly frigid as I descended. My flashlight flickered in the subdued illumination, projecting unsettling shadows upon the walls. Each step felt increasingly burdensome, yet I had persevered to this point. The point of no return had been reached. Upon reaching the bottom, I discovered myself in a little, stale chamber. The walls were adorned with dusty shelves, and an antiquated wooden chest occupied the center of the floor. I approached it, my fingers quivering as I extended them toward the lock. The key inserted into the lock effortlessly. Upon opening the chest, an overwhelming sense of fear enveloped me. Within, there was piles of papers, documents, photographs, and aged, fragile folders. This was the moment. This was what Catherine had safeguarded. I commenced sorting through the documents, my heart racing as I perused the initial pages. They comprised contracts, legal documents, and certain texts that were excessively opaque for my complete comprehension. However, my gaze fell upon a recognizable name. Harold Clark. The documents disclosed all information. Harold Clark had engaged in illicit economic transactions with Catherine, secrets that had remained concealed for years. There was offshore accounts, dubious transactions, and relationships with influential individuals beyond my understanding. Catherine had endeavored to shield me from everything. She understood that if anyone discovered the truth, it would obliterate everything. I now have the key to the truth. However, this reality was accompanied by peril. Harold Clark would go to any lengths to obtain this information. And now, I needed to choose how to safeguard myself, my future, and the legacy Catherine had bequeathed. I sat in the poorly illuminated chamber, the chest ajar before me, its contents cascading out in a disordered array. Documents, images, and agreements that disclosed information I could scarcely fathom. The secrets Catherine had concealed, information she had withheld from all, including myself, were now in my possession. Harold Clark's name repeatedly surfaced in those documents. Among individuals connected to influential corporations, individuals possessing power and wealth who functioned covertly, there were accounts, substantial amounts of money, transactions with defunct firms, and agreements with individuals whose names were unfamiliar, yet whose influence was unmistakable. I perused the documents, my hands trembling as I grasped the gravity of the situation. Catherine was aware of all of this. She had been involved in a far grander endeavor than I had ever conceived, and now it was my responsibility to ensure its preservation. What purpose would this information serve for me? I sought to avoid entanglement in a realm of duplicity and moral decay. I was reluctant to jeopardize what Catherine bequeathed to me, yet I saw that I could not simply abandon it. The inheritance Mom had bequeathed to me was of paramount significance. I had a singular option to safeguard the truth, to utilize it judiciously. I secured the chest and fastened the lock. The key I discovered would remain in my possession, known just to me its whereabouts. No one, particularly Harold, would ever discover it. I rose, my thoughts accelerating. I was at a pivotal juncture. I had long existed in the shadow of my past, tormented by the sacrifices I had endured and the relationships I had forfeited. However, while I stood in the confined, dimly lit chamber beneath the house by the water, I discerned a realization. This reality was mine to govern. No one else could exert control over me any longer. I exited the shed, securing the trap door behind me. The refreshing night air soothed my skin, and for the first time in an extended period, I experienced a sensation of tranquility. I returned to the house deliberately, my decision resolute. The following morning, I reached a decision. I resolved to cease evading my history. I would no longer conceal myself. The inheritance Catherine bequeathed to me encompassed more than mere financial assets or property. It pertained to liberty. It involved have the fortitude to assert ownership and declare, "This belongs to me, and no one shall usurp it." I would assert control over that which I could manage. I would utilize the funds judiciously. Yet I would not allow them to define my identity, and I would safeguard the vault's secrets, employing them solely as a last resort. The following day, I sought a lawyer in town, one who could assist me with the estate and whom I could trust, ensuring they would not exploit my situation. I had discovered through experience that not all individuals are trustworthy, although this time I would not repeat previous errors. While seated in the attorney's office, executing the requisite documentation to finalize the estate, I discerned an additional realization. I no longer required anyone's validation. After years of pursuing validation and striving to be the ideal mother and dependable individual, I finally began to live for me, and the experience was exhilarating. I rose, prepared to confront whatever lay ahead. My life is now within my control, and I am unafraid. I possess the strength, fortitude, and intelligence to safeguard what was properly mine. No one shall deprive me of that. Upon exiting the lawyer's office and stepping into the sunlight, I inhaled deeply. The atmosphere suddenly felt distinct, more buoyant, as though the burdens of the past had been alleviated, and the future appeared expansive, brimming with potential. I was uncertain about the forthcoming chapter of my life. Although I was certain of one thing, I was prepared for it, prepared to live my life according to my own terms. No further compromises, no retrospection, and for the first time in an extended period, I grinned, recognizing that I was precisely where I was destined to be.